In the town of Azurville, residents know two things to be true. One, those who are born in Azurville die in Azurville. Two, those who die in Azurville stay in Azurville.
Do you ever look back on your life and wonder if a single decision would have changed everything? If you had just taken that job, if you had gone to that school, if you had just said yes or no? Well, I tell you, it's easier said than done. I look back on my life and I wonder what would have happened if I had said no. But honestly, it doesn't matter how many times I play it in my head. I can't think of why I wouldn't have said yes. Small town, you grow up, you know everybody. At some point, you come to terms with the fact that you'll most likely be marrying someone you knew in diapers. For me, that was freshman year of high school. I had gotten my braces off and a fancy new haircut, but I was nothing to sing home about. Just your run-of-the-mill teenage girl. I used to ask, why me? But maybe my shyness had been part of the appeal. I knew so many other girls who would have jumped at the chance. Maybe he knew they wouldn't have lasted in the long run. Not like me. It's funny, I remember one time watching in a nature documentary that even though predators are born with the instincts, the genetic makeup, the skills needed to kill their prey, they stick to the weak ones. They go after the antelopes with broken legs, the ones who run the slowest. Even though they have the means to go after the faster ones, they want the easy meal. That's all I was. But you picture yourself this, young girl, new in school, though not new in town, just sitting by, watching tryouts for track, waiting for her friend to get done so they can walk home, like they had all year. When all of a sudden, the star athlete, the big one, the one who everyone says is going to go big, go professional, gonna make it out of here, comes up to you, of all people. Not the cheerleaders, not the girls running on the field, but you. The mouse on the bleachers, trying to finish writing up math homework in a chewed up notebook. The one in the long skirt to hide the fact that her knees aren't lined up evenly. The one who haunches over to hide the fact that she's taller than half the guys in her class. That's the one he pays attention to. At first, you think it's because the ball flew over to your feet, so you hand it back to him. You don't even look at him, you keep your grip on the ball just to make sure that you don't look like a fool by dropping it. You've met before, but it doesn't change how handsome he's become over the years. He takes the ball from you and you think it's over, that you can go back to your homework and wait for your friend. Then he doesn't leave. He stands there, leaning over a little so you can gleam in on your notes, and he asks what you're working on. Still naive, you go on and on about algebra. It takes a few more questions about school, and even more questions about outside of school, and finally a direct ask if you wanted to go to the movies with him, before it occurs to you that he's been flirting the entire time. You look over at the other guys, thinking this is a joke, a dare, but no one else is watching. The rest of the boys are in the middle of tryouts. The cheerleaders are talking to each other, presumably about the routine. Even your friend is on the other side of the track running. It's just you and him. Like I said, small town. You come to accept the fact that one day you'll marry, if you choose to marry, I should say, someone you grew up with. That didn't mean I had a crush on anyone per se. I was a mousy girl who studied too much. I accepted that one day I would end up with one of the nerdy boys. That we would live a quiet life together, maybe have a kid or two. Peaceful. I never had much ambitions, really. I guess I wanted to be a librarian or maybe a preschool teacher. Nothing too glamorous, just something that was comfortable. I always pictured myself being married, though. I always pictured myself in a home with a man and kids and a dog. I never got the dog. But the star athlete, tall, handsome, real muscular-like, The kind of boy who already broken a few hearts. He was never on my radar. I never expected to be on his. Again, I wouldn't say I had a crush on him. It was never going to happen, or so I thought. But I did find him handsome. When my friends and I would rank over who we thought had grown up the cutest, they had all swooned over this boy, and I had always swooned too. Here he was, asking me to the movies. I have played the scene in my head over and over again, and I still can't think of a reason to say no. If I had known what I do now, well, the list of reasons would have been endless. But in that moment, who we were, I just can't think of one. So I said yes. He smiled and winked, said he'd call me. I realized after he walked away that he didn't have my number, but these were the days of phone books, and it was a small town. He'd find me. Sure enough, he called me that very night, right after dinner. I was flattered, but also a little put off, I guess. Wasn't there a rule that it normally took a boy a few days to call? That's what my friends had said. That's what the handful of magazines I had read told me too. Yet here he was, calling me on a Tuesday night, asking how my day went and how excited he was to be taking me to the movies on Friday. I went back to feeling flattered. Eventually, my daddy came into the room and said we had talked enough. I tried to tell this to the boy, but he just seemed to talk over me. Finally, Daddy had to come over and take the phone from me, tell him straight on that it was a school night. The boy obeyed immediately. He was off the phone before he could even tell me goodnight. He didn't call me the rest of the week. I wasn't too bothered by it, although I did catch myself eyeing the phone each night after dinner. School was very much the same. We didn't have any classes together since he was a few years ahead of me. I only saw him during practice when my friend was running on the track field. I think I saw him waving at me once, but he was so far away he might have been signaling a teammate. I went back to thinking the date was a practical joke. That maybe his buddies had been around the night he called, egging him on to keep up with the pretenses. But to what end? The boys I had known were immature, but not cruel. What would they be hoping to get out of this? Sure enough, though, Friday came and went. There had been no practice that day because of rain, so my friend and I got a ride home. I sat in my room and did my homework. I did not look at the phone. Then around 7, there had been a knock on the door. A harsh, quick one, like whoever was on the other side was in a big hurry. Daddy looked at Mama, who shrugged and went back to her knitting. Daddy turned down the TV and went to look. "Well, hello, young man," I remember him saying, his voice raising in an almost sing-song-like manner, as if he meant for it to travel over to my ears. I did indeed perk up then. When I saw who it was, I perked up even more. He smiled at me all big-like, showing his pearly whites. Then as soon as my daddy went back to the TV, he asked me when I was going to change. I didn't understand. He was in a jacket and jeans. I was in the same knee-length style dress I always wore, and we were just going to the movies. I was about to point out that I didn't know he was going to pick me up, but before I could get the words out, he kept insisting that I go and change. Said he wanted me to feel like $1,000,000 tonight. I didn't want to make him angry. I invited him in, introduced him to my parents, although they already know who he was. Our mamas were in a book club together, and our daddies sometimes played golf. I told him to wait while I got dressed up. I had to sneak into my parents' room for a bit of Mama's makeup. Nothing too much, a little blush, a little eyeshadow. I thought about lipstick, but Mama only had dark colors, and I thought it would look like I was trying too hard. I remember him walking us out to the car. The rain had picked up again, so he held his coat over to protect me, and I just about thought it was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for me. I don't remember the movie. Something black and white. I just remember his arm around me all throughout it, and how safe it made me feel. After that, he would go out of his way to find time with me at school, usually him skipping periods or convincing me to skip periods. Sometimes we left together at lunch or the last class of the day. I had never done anything like that before. I remember being so scared about my grades or getting a phone call home. Like I said, I was never ambitious, but I followed the rules. He brought out another side of me, I guess. He even started sneaking me out of the house over weekend nights. I didn't really understand why. The town wasn't exactly more interesting once everything was closed. Mostly we just drove around in his car. I would get so tired on those drives, but I never told him. My parents would ask the next day why I was always sleeping until noon. Maybe that was my fault. I don't remember anyone being jealous. We got some stares when we would hold hands in the hallway, but that made sense to me, I suppose. I never would have put the two of us together either. Then there was that one day when the head cheerleader approached me about him. "He's your boyfriend, right?" she had said between smacking her gum. It's funny how I remember the gum or how her voice held no malice, but I honestly can't recall her name anymore. "You two are going steady?" It had been a few months since the movie date, but no one knew about our nighttime drives, at least as far as I'd been aware. I suppose we did look like a couple when we managed to be together in front of a crowd. We had no official label on it yet. "Yeah," I ended up saying. I liked being able to say it. "Yeah, he's my boyfriend." "Be careful with that one," she had warned. Again, there was no malice in her voice, but I wanted to believe she was jealous. I wanted to believe that the head cheerleader couldn't stand that I was the one dating this man now. But even then, a part of me deep down knew that wasn't the case. I don't remember what I said. I wanted to be mean, say something to hurt her, but I think I just mumbled something like, "Okay," and then walked away with my head down. That's another moment in my life I wish I could do over, but I can't think what would have made me do something different. That's how it carried on for the rest of the year. I missed more and more classes, and my grades did indeed drop. My parents yelled at me, demanded to know where I went, what I was doing. They never asked who I was with. One night I went to sneak out. My window was on the first floor, but it wouldn't budge. I yanked and yanked, nearly threw out my shoulder, no results. I looked down and saw nails on the other side. I knew he was waiting for me, but this was before cell phones, so texting was non-existent and emailing would have been useless. I thought to call up his house phone and whisper over a voicemail, but I didn't want to risk waking his folks. In the distance, I could hear a car horn going off, and I sat hopelessly in my room. I knew he would be upset, but I didn't expect what was about to happen. It's funny, though, because for a while there, it had become my normal. But back then, he had been the boy who held me during scary movies, who would take my hand to show me off down the hallway. I knew he'd be mad, but I had an explanation. Surely he would listen to reason. I met up with him the next day before school started. I'd even called out to him, so anxious I was to get the situation sorted. He pulled me aside behind the bleachers. I blushed, dumb enough to think that we were going to sneak a makeout session. Instead, he grabbed my arm so tightly that it hurt. "Where were you?" he demanded through gritted teeth. I remember the spittle hitting against my cheek, making me blink. "I waited all night for you, wasted so much gas and time." I opened my mouth to explain, but he didn't let me. "Were you with another boy? Huh? You cheating behind my back?" I was shocked by the accusation. "What? No, I would never." "You're just like all the rest. I thought you were different, but you're just another whore." He stormed away, leaving me behind, feeling dejected and empty, confused by what had happened. Where had all that come from? What had I done to make him so angry? I thought of excuses. Gas wasn't cheap even in those days, and the fact that he was so jealous meant that he truly cared about what we had. He didn't want to share me. And hadn't I gotten jealous over the cheerleader the other day too? He hadn't hit me. That's what I said over and over again. He hadn't hit me. I told myself that I would make it up to him. I wanted so badly for him to forgive me. Of course, he ultimately did forgive me after the window incident. I said that my parents didn't approve. He said that he would be the one to worry about that. I thought it was romantic at the time, but in hindsight, I have no idea why. I found out what he meant after he graduated. He said that his uncle got him fixed up with an apartment across town. He was going to move in over the summer, get a job with the local mechanics. I was excited, but also sad. He would be moving far away, leaving me behind at high school. He seemed to pick up on my dismay because he asked what was wrong, and I told him. I can't think of why I wouldn't have told him. Then his smile grew even wider. "But that's the best part," he insisted. "There's room enough at this place for two." I didn't know what he meant at first. It should seem obvious, but when you're 15 and your second year of high school, the thought of moving out with your boyfriend seems like such a pipe dream, it doesn't even cross your mind. As the wheels began to click, I contemplated what he said. Was I ready to move out? There were only so many high schools in our small town. Would I be able to transfer? Would my parents allow it? I turned to voice my concerns, but his face had hardened. His eyes seemed to become darker, colder. I shivered. I felt like if I didn't say yes right there, something bad was going to happen. I ignored it. I got up and walked away, the thing everyone says you're supposed to do. That was when he grabbed my arm again. At that point, he had done this so many times I had gotten used to wearing long-sleeve shirts. That time was different, though. He yelled in my face, saying that he had done so much for me, that he knew what the other kids in school thought about us, and did I seriously hope to do any better? What was I going to do, go back and marry some nerd in the library, if any of them would even have me? His words, not mine. He said that he knew me. He knew that all I wanted was to be comfortable and laugh. And he was offering that to me right now. Didn't I love him enough to take this chance? I tried to say that of course I loved him, that wasn't the issue. I was still underage, and my parents had a say in the situation, and it mattered. He scoffed and said, "Fuck your parents." I got mad then, told him he had no right to say anything against my folks. I yanked from his grip and went to march out the door. He grabbed me again and he struck me, square across the face. It felt like 1,000 needles in my cheek. "Now you can't go back," he whispered, "because everyone will see." He would be the one in trouble if I left, not me. But then I started thinking about it more, how I had trashed my school career, my relationship with my parents, for the sake of love. I had told myself this entire time that it had been worth it. What would they say if I went back now with an ex-boyfriend who moved across town and a bruise on my cheek? Some would feel sorry for me, but most would say I told you so. My daddy certainly would. "I told you that boy would be no good." Hell, his parents would probably blame me, say that I had done something to make him mad. Besides, I had believed him. No one had ever taken any special interest in me. I had been so flattered by his attention, half because of his popularity and half because he actually wanted to talk to me, be seen with me. This was a small town. Would anyone see the bruise on my cheek and want me then? The worst part, the absolute worst part of it all, though, was that I still loved him. I remembered how gentle and kind he had been in the beginning, how romantic. He had changed. Maybe it was my fault. He was just trying to give me what I had told him I always wanted. And I was trying to throw it away like a spoiled child. I'd probably be angry too if the situation were reversed. You might not agree with my line of logic, but I stayed. I went back to my parents' home only once to collect my things. A handful of clothes, not even my furniture. He said I wouldn't need it anyway. I tried to bring back some of the sentimental photos, but he refused. The whole time, my mama was crying, begging me to change my mind. My daddy whispered real close to me that I always had a home here, and that if anything happened, he would come and save me. I just smiled at that. Next thing I knew, I was all moved in. I tried to enroll in a different high school, but without parental consent, I couldn't get far. I wanted to get a part-time job so I wouldn't be home all day, but he insisted he made enough money for the both of us. It must have been true considering how long he was gone during the day. For the first few weeks, he brought food home, takeout mostly. I appreciated it at first, but after a while, the grease and the salt began to weigh on us. He didn't say anything, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes when he opened up the fridge and all that remained was leftover Thai. The next day, he brought back groceries, told me it was time to learn how to cook. At that point, I really only knew sandwiches and boxed cake, but I was excited. It gave me something to do besides waiting for the next installment of Dancing with Nobility. This was before the internet, and I knew I would need a cookbook. Unfortunately, I didn't have any money, and I wasn't about to call my mama to ask to borrow, so it was time to get to know the neighbors. The first door I knocked on was the one to the right. There was no answer, so I assumed no one was home. The second one was to the left. I didn't hear a voice right away, but there was shuffling as someone came over. I heard a small voice then. It sounded young, like an infant. "Yes," came the answer as the door opened. Behind it stood a pretty young woman, probably only a few years older than I was. She looked tired, though. I introduced myself, and the lady told me her name was Robin. I mentioned that me and my man, I didn't want to call him my boyfriend for fear of how that would look, but I also didn't want to lie and say he was my husband, had just moved in and that I didn't have any money for a cookbook. Robin laughed and said how that was the struggle for housewives. I didn't correct her. She invited me in. Instantly, the smell hit me like a ton of bricks. Sour milk mixed with the sickly sweet scent of babies. I could hear them louder now, so much so that I could tell there were two of them. The apartment looked like it might have been nice once, but the sink held piles of unwashed dishes and envelopes littered every table surface. Clothes had been strewn over the couch to the point where sitting would be impossible. I tried to hide the wrinkle in my nose. I felt sorry for Robin. I recognized something in her, here all day alone with her babies. Husband most likely didn't get back until late, and when he was home, he probably saw the chores as woman's work. As she opened up cabinet after cabinet, looking for one of her cookbooks, I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. I turned my head down low, expecting a cat. Instead, what I was looking at had been a tiny human foot, wrapped up in a sock. Attached to it was a small baby. I didn't know how old babies needed to be to do certain things, but this one held itself up and looked back at me. I should probably mention that this baby was blue and transparent. I could see right through its skull as it stared up at my gaze. Little puffs of mist billowed off over its shoulders. "Here it is," Robin interrupted, holding out a large book in front of me. I startled before taking it. She noticed and asked what was wrong. I gestured towards the dead baby. "I'm so sorry." She looked over, eyes wide with shock, until she saw what I was looking at. "Oh, my first. Don't worry, it happened years ago, and he's still around." I didn't know what to say at that point. Everyone dealt with this sort of thing their own way, I suppose. This wasn't the first dead child I had ever seen, but I had never imagined it would be easy. This kid would never grow up, eternally stuck in a body that wouldn't mature, wouldn't understand the world around them. Just lost in a total state of confusion. I heard the other baby screaming in the back and decided that was my cue to leave. I thanked Robin for the cookbook. She told me to stop by any time I wanted, and I said I would, but I'm not sure how true that statement was. That night I made a simple dinner. Chicken with rice and peas. The meat was a little overcooked, but I hid it with some gravy and lemon juice. I looked in dismay when I realized that half the groceries he had bought for us were now gone for this one meal. He wouldn't be too pleased about that either. Luckily, when he got home, he was so tired from work that he happily ate up his portion of the meal. I won't deny I was proud to have done something right by him. I had been halfway through my own plate when our phone rang. I was confused since we had only moved in, so who would be calling? But he told me to go ahead and answer it, and I got up and went to the living room. It ended up being a wrong number, someone calling for a person named Juliet, and I hung up. By the time I had walked back into the kitchen, he had moved my plate over to his and dumped on the remainder of my food. I stared at him, mouth open. He looked confused. He said I thought I was done as he scoffed down a spoonful of peas. He said that he needed it since he was out working all day while I just stayed home. Then he said I could stand to lose a few pounds anyway. That night I pinched at my stomach to focus on something besides how loudly it groaned. I made it through 2 more nights before the fridge had emptied, and that was because I had skipped lunch both days. I didn't tell him. Maybe he wouldn't have taken my food again if he had known. So I was left there with an empty fridge and an empty wallet. I didn't want to bother Robin, especially since I still needed her cookbook. Besides, she had her hands full. She probably couldn't have spared the food even if she wanted. I still couldn't call my mama, but then I remembered my friend from school, Jeanette. Maybe she would be willing to spare some pasta and sauce just to get me through the night. Friday was paycheck day, so hopefully he would go out and buy more groceries then. I waited until I knew she'd be home from school and then went ahead and called her. She was over 30 minutes later, so happy to have heard from me. I won't lie, I was so thrilled to see her that tears were brought to my eyes. We spent the next hour catching up, not that I had much to say, and she kept asking questions I didn't want to answer. No, I wasn't in school. No, I didn't have a job. I said I had a friend. The title seemed a little too formal for Robin, but I noticed how quiet my actual friend had become once I said it. It got to a point where I knew he'd be home soon, so the two of us got to cooking. Simple spaghetti, but she had brought over spices to make it more flavorful. That would have to do. I sent her on her way before he got back. She didn't seem to want to leave. I had finished setting the table by the time he got into the door. I asked him how his day went. He grumbled. He didn't ask how my day had been. So tired he had been that it took until he sat down and fully looked at dinner before everything went wrong. He demanded to know where I had gotten this food, that he had never bought it, so where had it come from? I tried to explain, but he kept on hollering. He asked if I was seeing some guy while he worked his finger to the bone to provide for us. I managed to tell him that a friend of mine had dropped it off. He yelled that I was so stupid for telling people our address. He picked up my plate and threw it against the wall. I screamed as it shattered, just barely missing my head. He picked up his own plate and told me to clean up the mess before storming off into our bedroom, locking the door behind him. It took hours to wash everything up and throw out. The wall remained stained, no matter how often I ran a wet cloth over it. I ended up passing out on the couch. I didn't know what to do the following night. I was too terrified to move. I hadn't woken up before he had left for work, so the day had been spent with me sitting on the couch, TV on for white noise. Every once in a while I checked the fridge, begging something to manifest inside of it. I slept another few hours until keys in the latch woke me up. I sat straight up, prepared for the worst. But he came in with a box of pizza and a big smile. He told me that we both deserved a treat after such a difficult week, and that he was so proud of me for learning these recipes in such a short amount of time. We sat on the couch while we ate, a movie playing, his arm around me. He never once tried to take my slices. The weekend came, and both of us were home in the apartment. He decided it was time for us to go out and see the sights. I was actually pretty excited. We had grown up in the rural side of town. I wanted to see the shops and restaurants. I put on my prettiest dress and tied my hair up. I went to meet him in the foyer, but he looked at me as though I had grown a second head. I asked what was wrong. He said nothing, just that he didn't understand why I was dressed like a harlot. I looked down. The skirt went past my knees like all my other skirts. I was even wearing a sweater to cover the yellow on my arm, despite the warmer weather. I looked at him, waiting for him to give me the answer. He pointed at our bedroom and told me to go change. I didn't know what else to put on, so I switched out for a blouse and dress pants. He said that now I looked like I was going for a job interview. Was I trying to look older than I was? What kind of attention was I trying to get? So I changed into my most comfortable t-shirt and jeans. He said that now I wasn't trying at all, and that if I couldn't even get myself dressed properly, that I didn't need to go out. I don't remember what I said. I just remember crying. I must have agreed because I recall sitting by the TV as always. I wanted to phone up my friend and invite her over, but somehow I figured that he would know and accuse me of cheating again. He came back that night with takeout steak dinners, and I wondered if his paychecks could really cover it. That night, and I'm ashamed to admit it, I went through his wallet. The dinners he ordered came with beer, so I knew he'd be out. The wallet was completely full of cash, and I thought, how unusual. My parents had cash, but never like that. He should be putting some of it in the bank. Did that mean we had no savings? In a moment of panic, I thumbed the dollar bills. I didn't dare take one. I pocketed a dime, hoping that at least that would go unnoticed. If it did, I would just chuck it between the couch cushions. It was strange, the power rush I had gotten from that. Before I had nothing. Now I had a dime to my name. I wish I could say that was the last time, but I kept doing it. A dime here, a nickel there. Pennies mostly, though. I stuffed them in old socks I kept at the back of the drawer. It took a while, but eventually I had myself a bit of savings. I thought carefully about what I wanted to do with it. I don't know why, but the first thought to come to mind was a bus ticket. I knew whatever I ended up buying couldn't be permanent, like a new outfit. I wanted to buy myself some food so I could have regular lunches again, but where would I put it away? Even something I could eat in a day, like fruit or canned soup, left remnants behind. I would have to buy something at a cafe and let them throw it out. which sounded expensive. Still, my money, what little of it, was precious to me. I decided to save it for an emergency. There was a knock on my door, and at first I thought it might be Robin, but I had already returned her cookbook after I'd written down all the recipes he liked. Who else knew where we lived? I answered it, and there stood Jeanette, eyes beaming. She told me she got herself a weekend job and that she was taking me out. I stared at the clock. Already past 4. I didn't realize it had been so late. I gave a smile, feeling guilty about the fact that she had come all this way, but I would need to start dinner soon. "Oh," she said, the disappointment obvious on her face. She swallowed it down immediately. "Then I'll just stay here again." "That's not a good idea." Robin's door began to creak open, and the tired, pretty woman stuck her head out. "Could you keep it down, please?" she whispered. "I just got the little ones to sleep." We nodded our apologies. I looked over at my friend, who stared at me and then the exit, unsure which one she should head to. I felt so guilty. More than that, the thought of spending another evening in front of the television alone sounded like complete torture. I invited her in. It's amazing how instantly things felt like the old days with her presence around. She told me all about how school was going, how the track team was. She didn't bring up her family. She never did. This was her time away from them, but I missed mine terribly. "Have you heard from my folks?" I asked, unable to keep the question to myself. She fiddled with her hair. "They've called a few times." "You didn't tell them anything, did you?" I started to panic. What if they came over? He would throw a fit. But as soon as the fear washed over me, it melted away. My parents might know where I am. They might come to save me. Save? "I just told them you were being looked after," she went on. I'm not sure what expression I had on my face because she kept going. "That is, you have a roof over your head and a place to sleep. Food to eat." She said this last part reluctantly, and I nodded. "Are you?" She talked as though her words themselves had feet to tiptoe on. "Being looked after?" "Of course," I said eventually. "It's like you said, I have a roof over my head and a place to sleep. And food to eat." "Right. And that." She nodded. There was silence which hung between us after that, and I eventually excused myself to the bathroom. I didn't want her to leave, but I did want this conversation to end. I knew she didn't want to go home either, not with her situation. Poor Jeanette. No one seemed to understand how painful it was for her to be going home to a dead mother. I certainly didn't. I gave her all the love a friend could, but my dead relatives went to the cemetery. "That's where they belong," my daddy had always said. "No use dwelling over the past." I used to think it was cruel, like we were forgetting about family, but after seeing the weight of death had on Jeanette, I started to understand his point. I didn't actually use the facilities. I just stood in front of the mirror and stared at myself. I had definitely lost weight. My eye sockets had sunken, except for the purple bags underneath. My cheekbones stuck out more. I was amazed Jeanette hadn't pointed these out. I don't know how long I'd stood in front of that mirror. I had never been ambitious. I went with this man I thought I loved because he promised to give me everything I wanted. And on the surface, that's what it looked like. I was in an honestly decent apartment, keeping it clean, although not much mess was made when it was mostly me here, and learning to cook. Maybe sometime down the line we could get a dog, or a cat. Maybe we would have children. The thought barreled through me like a punch. I can't explain why the idea of Bear and his babies made me so terrified. And then for some reason, I thought of Robin and her dead baby, the little ghost forever crawling around her apartment. I could think of no crueler fate for a child. But would I be any better if I had this man's baby, even if it lived? Would it be worth putting it through the same torment that I could barely withstand myself? Thinking it fully for the first time felt like a dam breaking, and suddenly every realization came flooding in. I wasn't comfortable. I hardly had enough to eat, and I was scared half the time. I didn't even want my best friend to come over. I didn't talk to my parents anymore. I became the type of person who skipped classes and snuck out, who lied and lied. I hadn't been myself since the day I met him. I wanted to go back to school. There was still time. I might have to catch up with summer school once or twice, but I'd missed less than a year. I could still get myself a job, and who knows, maybe I wouldn't ever get married. Maybe me and Jeanette could get a place together, away from our oppressive lifestyle. I thought of my emergency funds. I had just enough for a bus ticket. It wasn't much to go off of, but it was enough to get me home. Suddenly filled with a sense of renewed hope, I rushed through the door to tell my friend of my plan. I stopped at my sock drawer first and grabbed the whole bundle from my dresser, not even bothering to pour the change out from inside. I must have looked insane, standing there in my hallway, eyes wide as I held up dirty socks and saying, "Jeanette, I'm ready to go home." But like a true friend, she only smiled at my antics. I was ready to rush out the door, then fortunately she had the insight to stop me and get packed up. It didn't take long, especially between the two of us. Next thing I knew, we were both on the bus, and I watched with glee as that apartment building got smaller and smaller. It was strange, though. When I looked back up at our room, Robin was standing outside on her balcony. She seemed to be looking right at me. I tried to ignore the spine tingle it gave me, and instead focused on how happy I was to finally be going home. I realized then that I hadn't felt this way in a long time. My parents were just as thrilled as I was to see me home. Mama cried as she held me close. Daddy did too, much more quietly. My room had been left exactly how it was. Mama offered to take me out the next day so we could get ice cream and go shopping. I said it sounded nice, but maybe we could take a rain check for the weekend. I had missed enough school as it was. She smiled much wider than I had seen her do in a while. At dinner, I ate and ate. Mama was happy to give me as many helpings as I wanted. No one said anything about my weight. In fact, they didn't ask me questions at all. They just talked about how glad they were that I was home and wanting to go back to school. Then they brought up little things around the neighborhood, catching me up on what had happened since I had been gone. I went to bed easy that night, fell asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow. That is, until the phone's ringing ripped through the midnight air like an assassin's dagger. I bolted upright. I had a phone in my room, but it was connected to all the others in the house. By the third ring, it had been picked up, and I could hear Daddy yelling. I hesitated, knowing there would only be one person on the other end. I wanted to go to their room to do what I could in order to set things right. This had been my fault, but I just hid under the covers like a scared child. Mama came in afterwards to check on me. I couldn't even pretend to be asleep as I sobbed loudly under the covers. She didn't lift them, but she patted and hugged me through them, saying it would be all right. She and Daddy would protect me. She didn't understand that I wasn't crying from only fear. I was crying from the guilt I had felt in causing this in their lives. I still went to school the next morning. He would know where to find me either way, but at least at school there was a much bigger building with more places to hide or escape from. I figured since he had graduated, security might not even let him back in. Besides, it was the best way, I thought, to protect my parents. Everyone seemed happy to see me, even people I had never spoken to before. They didn't have the discretion my parents did, though, and they, in fact, asked a lot of questions I didn't feel comfortable answering. Only the lead cheerleader, the one who had tried to warn me about him in the first place, had the means and authority to tell everyone to back off and give me some space. I could only thank her with my eyes, but she seemed to understand. I don't really remember much of that day. A new semester had started, so I had to see my counselor about getting into classes, then went around the school before introducing myself to teachers I hadn't met before. I struggled a little, being behind on the material, but I remember being able to turn in my work at least. It was nice to have rhythm again. It was nice to be doing anything besides watching TV or talking to strange neighbors. As the day crept closer to the end, however, I felt my anxiety rise. I couldn't avoid going home tonight, and I had nowhere else to go, except to Jeanette's, but she was dealing with enough. My daddy promised to protect me. I couldn't ask hers to do the same. I was just going to have to trust that it would be enough. I didn't even get a chance to walk back. As soon as I left the front doors of the school, there he was waiting in the parking lot. And I thought, is he really going to do this in front of everybody? A part of me wanted to bolt back inside the building, call for help, but the image of him running after me was so potent I froze in place. Jeanette stood in front of me like she was prepared for a fight. "Don't," I whispered, "don't." I'm not sure what I meant. Don't make a scene? Don't be a hero? My mind was whirling and blank all at once. Everyone around us had paused too. They were watching. I think I heard someone yell, "Call the police," but it was followed by laughter. This was entertainment to them. He approached us, hands in tight fists. A few people in the crowd let out a gasp. Jeanette stood closer to me, arms outstretched. "You go right back to your apartment, boy," she snapped at him. He ignored her and looked straight at me. His eyes were covered with sunglasses, and when he took them off, I couldn't believe what I was staring at. He was crying. There were actual tears in his eyes. "Baby," he said, his voice cracking, "I'm so glad I found you. I've been searching everywhere." I shivered at the thought. I tried to tell myself it was a lie because he had been harassing my family on the phone last night, but there was something so sincere about the way he spoke. Part of me remembered why I had fallen for him in the first place. "I'm so sorry," he went on. "This is all my fault. I never should have treated you the way I did." He actually apologized. He knew what he had done was wrong, and he was apologizing for it. I was stunned. Jeanette said something else, but in our minds, it was the two of us now. "If you come back, I promise things will be different. Better. You can get a part-time job, have your own money for groceries. We can go shopping in town." I thought about the two of us, how good things had been in the beginning, how he had been the most romantic boy I had known, how tall and handsome he was, how he made me do crazy things because he had loved me so much. Maybe we could have that back. He had seen the error of his ways, and he had come all this way out here just to beg for my forgiveness. What kind of man would do that in front of a crowd and not mean it? Stupid. I could have gone with Jeanette. I could have gone home to my parents. But I thought to myself, this had to be true. It had to be. Because if it wasn't, then what kind of person did it make me that I would let this kind of man into the lives of my loved ones? He knew where to find me. I couldn't hide forever. Not in this small town. Going back would be the easier choice. It would mean it was only me. So I had to believe his apology was real. I nodded, and the two of us headed over to his car. I could hear Jeanette screaming behind me, but I don't know what she said. That night, he cooked for me. A meal from scratch, not a box. Dessert was pre-made, but I was so thrilled at the prospect of eating something sweet in front of him. We didn't stay in to watch TV that night. Instead, we went out to town, like he said. He let me wear the dress he didn't like, and we went dancing. Then afterwards, a couple of drinks and a walk in the park. The next day, he stayed home from work. We went out again into every shop with a help wanted sign. Our search didn't last long. I got a job at a florist shop within walking distance of the apartment. When the interview was done, he and I went out shopping for new clothes. Then we had lunch, we went home, and made love in the afternoon. I felt like I was on the moon. I couldn't remember what I had been so afraid of before. He had meant it. Things were going to be different now. Things were going to be better. He cooked for me again that night, and we did stay in this time. We were in the middle of the latest episode for Dancing with Nobility when there was a knock on our door. Both of us looked up at the clock, wondering who it could be at this hour. He went to open the door. I kept my eyes on the TV, as though not being able to see meant that this situation would go away. I heard the voice before seeing who was there. I turned to face my daddy. I hadn't told him where I was. Must have been Jeanette. They didn't stay talking for long. Soon voices were raised high. I could see the lights of our neighbors turning on out from the window. At one point, Robin came out and asked them to keep it down so her little ones could sleep. I think Daddy muttered an apology, but it was drowned out by my man's obscenities. I sat on that couch, my knees curled up. Finally, I could hear Daddy calling out my name, but I was glued to the cushions. Going to him meant passing by my man. I wasn't strong enough to do it. He must have been able to sense this because I heard shuffling as he tried to get into the apartment. Then there was a loud crash followed by a thud. Someone had been hit, and that was what broke the spell keeping me seated. I ran over to the door and saw Daddy lying on the floor, hand over his jaw. He coughed once, a puddle of blood formed beneath him. "You monster!" I screamed. I don't know what got into me that I was suddenly throwing fists against my man's chest. I kept saying that phrase over and over again. "You monster! You monster!" He grabbed both my wrists into one hand and threw me to the side. I saw stars when my head hit the wall. The last thing I heard were sirens. I woke up to a strange smell, a mixture of rotten, sickly sweetness, much like a baby. Now alert, I looked around and didn't recognize my surroundings. I was in a bed, covered in a mess of tangled sheets. There was clutter on all of the furniture, and in the corner of this mess, over by the door, was a little blue vapor baby, staring at me. My head hurt tremendously, and for some reason, looking at the infant made it worse. I pressed a hand to my temple as I closed my eyes. "Hey there!" I recognized the voice to be Robin's. I peeked through my fingers to see that she was walking in with a glass of water and some pills. "I was wondering when you'd wake up." The pills were white, and I didn't bother to ask what they were as I placed both into my mouth and chugged down the water. Anything to stop the pain. "What happened?" I asked when I finally had the energy to. Robin explained that after my man had shouted at her, she called the police. They had arrested both of them. "Daddy didn't do anything wrong," I protested. I hoped that Robin had called Mama, but there was no way she would have known the right number. She just smiled weakly. "He technically did break in an entry to rescue me." Robin shook her head. "It don't really matter much. He was going about it all the wrong way." I asked what she meant. "Oh, there's no way your man is going to get a life sentence just for punching someone in the face, especially when that someone tried to break into his home." I went to protest, but she held up a hand. "In these cases, the law is pretty useless. It's best when we take justice into our own hands." I went silent, unsure if I didn't understand her because of the remaining headache or if her words just made no sense. Seeing my confusion, she held up a small pill bottle. Inside was a fair amount of powder. "What is that?" "Vitamins," she answered. I must have panicked at the thought of what I had swallowed from her because she shushed me again. "Think of your circumstances, baby. He's going to get out. You know this. You can run and keep running, but where on earth will you hide?" She was right. The first chance I got, I had indeed run. I'd run home. And he still found me, convinced me to go back. Once again, a moment in my life that I may have done differently. But I could not and cannot think of a reason for why I would have. I took the bottle. The police did indeed release my man, on bail from his parents. My daddy was released too. Both parties threatened to be back with lawyers. I barely remember that day at all, honestly. I don't recall if he had been nice or not. Felt as if I had been floating through time until dinner came. That was when I felt the weight of the pill bottle in my pocket. I distinctly remember opening it up and pouring it over his portion of spaghetti, matching it with the Parmesan cheese. I didn't even hesitate. Didn't stop to consider the weight of my actions. All I saw in my mind's eye was Daddy on the floor, bleeding. I forced myself to eat, even though the noodles went down like lead in my stomach, as if I too were eating poison. But I didn't want to raise suspicions. He didn't even notice something seemed off. I don't think he knew I had it in me. I hardly knew myself. It didn't take long, just one big old bite, and the coughing began. It started off like a clearing of the throat, but quickly grew more violent until he was up from the table and curling over. I stood, rushing to him, asking over and over again what was wrong. I never acted before in my life, but I made my eyes wide and my voice high with concern. "I'll call the ambulance," I shrieked. I picked up the phone, but positioned myself so he couldn't see my hand on the receiver. "Hello? Hello? My boyfriend's collapsed. I think he's choking. He needs help, now!" I kept yelling into the silence until the coughing stopped. I didn't turn immediately, genuinely afraid of what I might see. "Hey," he said to me, voice clear. "Gloria, are they coming?" My eyes wouldn't leave the floor as I turned around. This was a mistake. First thing I saw was his corpse on the ground. Stiff, harsh veins poked out from his skin like snakes. Bile mixed with the foam by his mouth. His own eyes were wide open. There he was, sitting atop himself, blue and transparent, just like Robin's baby. "Yes," my voice cracked. "They're coming." He nodded and looked back down at his corpse. Do you think there's anything they can do?" Images of the paramedics coming in, performing some miracle of reviving him, played viciously in my mind. I shook my head, unsure who I meant to convince. No, not at this point. He didn't say anything, and I didn't look at him. We both stood in the kitchen, neither knowing what to do next, but for completely different reasons. "Well, I guess it's not that big of a deal," he went on. "You'll have to pay the rent now, but beyond that, what makes you think I'm staying?" The words poured out of me before I could stop them. He looked away from his corpse then and over to me. His eyes reflected in the light, making them appear even colder than normal. His hands became fists once more, but I wasn't afraid. "I don't have to take care of you," I stated. He stormed over to me, but kept his hands at his side, except to point. "Yes, you do. We're a couple. We moved in here together. We're not married." He opened his mouth, but he had no comeback. "You can't leave," he went on, his voice somewhere between angry and desperate. You can't. I'll... You'll what?" He stared at me, eyes wide, and I wondered how I never noticed before that he was truly pathetic. I walked out of the kitchen and back to our bedroom. I took out my suitcase and began packing. "Where are you going?" he demanded from the hallway. "You can't leave now. My body is still rotting in the kitchen. I can't use a phone." I didn't answer as I kept placing clothes inside my bag. "Can't you hear me? I can't use a phone. How will my parents know?" That last part made me freeze. He hadn't been a nobody after all. He had a family. One that would notice pretty quickly that he wasn't showing up to work, who would find it suspicious that he dropped dead suddenly, especially if his girlfriend walked out on the same night. Same thoughts must have been crossing through his mind. "It was you, wasn't it?" He was shouting now. It amazed me that I still flinched, even though I knew he couldn't touch me. Somehow his voice seemed to come from everywhere, in all directions. "You did this to me, didn't you? Didn't you? Answer me, Gloria!" Would never truly end, would it? He would make me unpack. He would make me stay. Or he would tell. It didn't take him long to figure out the truth, and why wouldn't it? I'd been careless and sloppy. I didn't know. I just wanted it all to stop. It wouldn't take long for authorities to learn what had happened, especially with his testimony. I would go to jail. There was a chance my parents would too after the assault charges. Everything I had fought for, down the drain. I should have built a case against him, worked it out all in court somehow. Ghosts weren't legally allowed to be placed in prison. They didn't fall under the jurisdiction of a life sentence, and leaving them in there for eternity was deemed inhumane. He would now never suffer for his crimes. But I would, because I had wanted to get out. It wasn't fair. Nothing about this was fair. I stormed past him into the kitchen. He jumped back to let me, even though it wasn't necessary. I felt the cool breeze of his presence as I went by. It felt like brushing my skin against ice. I went up to the kitchen table and stared at his plate, only half empty. Like I said, I was careless and sloppy. This was my price to pay. When I asked, do you ever look back on your life and wonder what you would do differently? I first started wondering that as I took a bite. Ghosts can't go to prison, but we do get placed in separate cemeteries, one appointed by the town rather than our families. My parents are still allowed to visit, just at regulated hours. It's peaceful here. I'm on the edge of a hill where I can see the sunrise every morning. The company here isn't so bad. We're spread out pretty far apart, and some of the residents have been here so long they keep to themselves. It was a bit of an adjustment at first, the schedule of keeping still, not needing to eat or sleep. In many ways, it was like my time in the apartment, except without the TV. You eventually find tranquility within your own thoughts. During the day, anyway. The lawyer my parents hired came down, said he was working on an appeal to get me moved from this lot into the family one. He said it could take some time, especially since I had confessed, but not impossible. I sure hope he's right. Because while I may finally be far away from my ex, in a spot that could be described as comfortable during the day, it all changes at night. You see, he had also been placed in a cemetery. I don't know if his parents held the same sentiments towards the dead as mine did, or if he had chosen to be there, but either way, his remains had been placed in the lot right next to ours. During the day, when visitors came and went, there was a hustle and bustle that drowned everything else out. But at night, when all was quiet and most of the residents sunk back into their coffins for nightly peace, I could hear the faintest sound over the wind and crickets. The shouting of my ex, traveling from one lot to the next, over and over again. You did this. You did this. You did this. If you ever speak into the void and have the impression that she will respond, or that she is even listening at all, I can guarantee you she is not.